Join channel here. Get a name of color in the live streams for $1 a month or over at Subscribestar. So Dilbert, artist Scott Adams, based, or join the Odyssey and Rumble. Those are great sites also. So Yikes My Guy, touch grass, bad take, friend. So what a tricky video to try to do on YouTube. I saw this. I sat on the story for a few days because it's kind of right on the edge of what is okay for YouTube, but it's also so interesting. So let's give it a shot. So if the quartering covered it, it would be something like Scott Adams finds himself in hot water with a base spicy take, or something equally asinine. But he's making $1 million a year on YouTube, and he is in the game for the long haul. So credit to him. No shade for me. The guy's legitimately a genius. But Scott Adams did not find himself in hot water, or whatever they're trying to say. He's where he wants to be. He said what he said. He's not a dummy. He knows the probable reaction. He's aware. I mean, he has a YouTube channel because he has a message to get out there. He's aware of the culture war. He knows what's going on, and he knows, yes, more newspapers will ban, or digital newspapers will ban Dilbert. This isn't the 1990s when papers mattered. People have their own websites now, and you've got, Subscribestar and that kind of. There's other ways to monetize things. That makes newspapers a very small thing indeed. And I mean, papers in general are not what they used to be in the 90s. Like the power of the media in general is not nearly as powerful as it was a few decades ago. And every year it gets less and less. So things are becoming more and more decentralized, which is good. So Adams has 100,000 followers on Bit Chute alone. And Bit Chute's a tiny little video hosting network. And if you have 6 figures over there, it means you have a lot of support. So he's got a pretty decent social media footprint to get his message across. And obviously the message is important to him because he does a live streams on YouTube. He's interested in the culture war and politics in general. From the left will call him far right, but really from like a moderate milquetoast, a moderate point of view where he would be like a liberal from a few decades ago. So he knows more papers are going to ban him. It's like it just doesn't matter so much. Like what matters to him is having that social media footprint, getting his message across. So he already was massively successful with selling Dilbert merchandise over the past probably 30 years. He knows the papers will cancel him. He doesn't care. The money that the newspapers bring in is nothing compared to everything else. He probably makes more money from like sales. Like the merchandise from Dilbert is probably in the tens of millions of dollars, and then the money from YouTube alone is more than he probably ever made from a newspaper royalties. So clearly he values his message more so than the money because he's already sitting on, more than he knows. Beyond a certain point of money, there's kind of no point to it unless you're going to do something with it. So what happened was Scott Adams, the Dilbert comic guy, has got a YouTube channel, and he's sort of vaguely on the right, but more like he's a liberal from the 1980s who has nothing in common with a modern liberal, because back then you could be on the left and still be brutally honest. If you had you want to read newspaper headlines and articles and magazine articles from the 70s and 60s, even in the 80s, they were completely honest about the situation. Even news reports. Occasionally, you can find a few clips on YouTube, but you gotta know where to look for them about talking about issues. All that stuff is gone now. Like the media is not the media; it is nothing. The thing is, so people have like an 80s liberal and a current year liberal have nothing in common. Nowadays there can be no honest conversation because you'll just get canceled. It's an entirely different field of battle, and it's a situation that has to be resolved because it's making entire groups and social issues completely haram to discuss, which is a problem. Because if those issues need to be corrected through, that open marketplace of ideas, the harsh disinfecting sunlight, and they can't be corrected, then the situation will continue to deteriorate, which is why I say the situation absolutely has to be resolved. You can't run a country where you can't fix problems because you can't even have the conversation. The first stage is admitting there's a problem, and then, if you correctly frame the question, it's like you're halfway to an answer. You have to at least be able to have open, honest conversations where when you're done with the conversation, suddenly, if your life is destroyed after you have the conversation, well, obviously that's going to be the chilling effect on free speech. So the country is trapped right now in an emperor has no clothes situation. And no, don't look to your politicians to save you on the right or the left. That's not going to happen, which is a whole nother issue of the need for free speech on social media, but also legal protection from being fired or having the banks close your account. We should have had legal protection years ago, but our representatives don't represent us. They represent other interests, as you see by that taxpayer money going overseas. Yes, some of it's going overseas, and others is going into business investments for the politicians who are literally taking your taxpayer money. That's how they're worth. Gee, you're in office, but you're worth $50 million. Something's not adding up. Oh, I had some really good investments. Isn't that a breach of your fiduciary duty? Like, shouldn't the Security and Exchange Commission be involved in that? Yeah, they probably should, but they're not. Like, we're not going to vote our way out of this, are we? No, friendo. Form clubs. Anyway, if we can't even talk freely about things, all it does is build up pressure. The old adage of riots being the voice of the unheard, you get the idea there. So Scott Adams, riots are the voice of the unheard, but not for January 6th. Oh, what's the difference? We're raging for the machine. So Scott Adams has had an interesting journey. He had a change of heart about some of the things dealing with the recent thing over the past couple years. That turns out that was an issue for many people, but I suspect it's not an issue for you and I. So it seems like he's having a red pill journey, which is what I mean about a liberal from the 80s versus a modern one. They used to be able to have brutally honest conversations where everything was on the table because you weren't going to get canceled in the 80s or even the 90s up until about 10 or 15 years ago with a combination of cell phones and social media. This is honest conversations is something the modern participation trophy generation seems incapable of. And even if they're capable of it as individuals, the social media machine will just dox you and destroy your life. So you just can't have it unless you're so protected by wealth that you're able to. And there's just not enough people who are protected by wealth. So they respond to every hot topic with an emotional reaction and immediate ad hominem personal attacks. They're adults now who really don't know how to respond to honest conversations. The Twitter commie kids are, of course, calling him Hugo Boss, which they call everyone. But they can't point to what he said that they disagree with because these kids are used to dogpiling on social media and staying in an echo chamber. So they never have to actually engage with ideas. They just make personal attacks and then they block and then they pat themselves on the back. They don't actually. I mean, it's the peak slacktivists of current year. So Adams is reading a report on his YouTube channel where he discovers, and like all his videos get like say 20,000 views, and then you see one video it's got 100,000 views. It's like that's the hot video. He discovers that half the people in the report want to deny him his existence. Now keep in mind, the BLT kids are always saying that if you refuse to use their pronouns, then you're denying their existence, which is compelled speech. It's a whole nother story. It's a very bad path to go down. But here is like the left wing would have been firmly against compelled speech if you remember the Supreme Court decisions on speech. And suddenly that all changed recently. Suddenly compelled speech and authoritarianism is a good thing. It's like, when you're in power, use of power is a good thing. And when you're out of power, use of power is a bad thing. You don't really have any principles. Your only principle is to get in power and oppress and disenfranchise individual rights. So here's an example. A report comes out, half the respondents say it's not okay for people like Adams to exist. So he's calm about it, and he has a reasonable response. He says you should get away from those people who don't believe that it's okay for you to exist. Is it okay to be of European descent? Do white lives matter? Of course. And if a group didn't agree with this, then they're the problem. And here's the thing. Adams is in the morally correct position here. He didn't do anything wrong. He's calling out bad behavior, except he's calling it out in a privileged community that if you criticize, you'll get canceled, but clearly Adams is correct. Now here's where it gets interesting. On Twitter, you're getting the usual responses. The left wing is going off on Adams, or at least they're trying to. But things are different now because things are different now. You're seeing pushback. You're seeing people are defending Adams, and the group that he's protecting are finally kind of starting to see themselves as a group and stand up for themselves because he flat out wasn't in the wrong. Essentially said, if people hate you enough to deny your existence, then you should get away from them. Now, that's not the end of the topic because it leads us to, how the Garfield stuff is cute. It leads us to pulling at strings, and it kind of begs the question, if we look at this on a bigger scale, if we have people who don't think your group has the right to exist, then why not just continue the conversation and say it's time to separate de jure, not just de facto, by wealth with gated communities? People aren't quite to those levels of based yet, but they're slowly getting there because clearly this social experiment is not working out. There's a whole section of society who believes in defund the police and Soros-funded district attorneys with Kim Fox mutual combat type of philosophy. They have beliefs that cannot coexist with a functioning society. At this point, it would be better to separate into hard states or states with hard borders, or they have sovereignty, where different states can run themselves as they please to abandon the Fed and turn into a 50-state model or something similar to that. Because it turns out decentralized power and letting people live with who they wish and live according to the rules they want to live according to is probably going to be for the best. Because trying to govern to such a large Fed with too many groups that have interests adverse to each other is a recipe for disasters. And it's, you look around America now and you see the de-evolution of these cities. Like there's no point in continuing along this path. There are irreconcilable differences between these belief systems. So the Kotaku comment section has a myopic view of this because of the soft bigotry or lowered expectations. They built a construct based on cultural Marxism where there's only one possible group to blame. It's all nonsense, but that's why they built the dialectic over the decades. But it's based on nothing. And I mean, you can wash it away just by breaking down the argument and getting to the nucleus from which they build the argument outward. It's like, oh, it's just a theory. I mean, when you actually look at it, it's a theory that was specifically created to blame one group. You can simply take that theory and swap out another group to blame, and it's equally as valid. The truth is, anti-white racism is an issue, but a lot of people on the left, they just want to put earmuffs on and not hear the voices of the marginalized and oppressed victims. It's the one group in America that the media openly hates, and the government apparently hates too. How's that Ohio response? Because it's 95% of that group. So the poll literally came out and tells you how they feel. You have to wash off the brainwashing and come to your own conclusions. They're the problem, not you. The Dilbert guy had a fair point, but the kids don't want to engage because it would mean changing their whole worldview, even their lexicon. They have entire definitions given to them by this Bolshevik media in schools over the decades. It's not an organic evolution of language. It's literally Saul Alinsky, Frankfurt School propaganda that they've accepted over. It took decades to accept it, but it's pretty easy to wash it off because you get to the core and you say, so, like, what's the origin of this? Oh, it's some openly communist professor. It's like, okay, is there any evidence for it? No. Okay, then we can just throw it out. It's like, but when you control the dissemination of information, you're obviously going to have a much more powerful ability to influence things, which is why the right, libertarian, liberals, true liberals, are very much in favor of decentralized power, decentralized authority, decentralized spread of information, and protections for individual liberties from discrimination from banks and social media companies and NGOs. And the left wants the opposite. They want a Fed. They want centralized authority. They want the banks to be, the NGOs, the banks, financial institutions, to be de facto running the country, where you can't survive in a first world nation if you're debanked and you're kicked off financial institutions. Those are private companies, guy. Yeah, but we think the individual liberty is more important than $1 billion company. Don't you agree? And they get suddenly very defensive of PayPal and Chase Bank and Wells Fargo and Bank of America and MasterCard. It's like, see, you're the left wing and you're defending these Patreon and PayPal and Stripe and Foursquare. You defending these people because they're also left wing? That's weird. What happened to the left? I don't know. Something happened about 2012. Happened to the left. Anyway, very sincere thanks to everyone at Subscribestar. Why are they helping your YouTube channel? They're not subscribing for the YouTube channel. But if you want to join the YouTube, there's Bit Chute, Odyssey. If you want to join the YouTube, it's $1 a month, and you get your name highlight, a name of color in the live stream, and you get a star next to your name. Like, comment, subscribe. I'll see you guys all next episode.